Heroes save black twin sheep from ferocious wolves, Wolfew. You can't go out there alone, Martha. Those wolves will tear you to pieces just like they did to your husband. I've lived on this land for 63 years, Sheriff Parker. Those aren't just any sheep out there, they're the last of Samuel's bloodline. I'm not losing them too. The tension in the small farmhouse kitchen was thick enough to cut with a knife. Martha Calloway stood by the back door, her weathered hands gripping her late husband's shotgun. At 72, her silver hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and despite her age, determination blazed in her eyes. Through the window behind her, the howling of wolves grew louder in the darkness of the Montana night. Sheriff Jim Parker, a man in his mid-50s with salt and pepper hair and 30 years of law enforcement behind him, positioned himself between Martha and the door. Outside, the blizzard that had descended upon Eagle Crest Valley 3 days ago showed no signs of letting up. The clock on the wall read 11:42 p.m. Martha, please, the storm's getting worse and those wolves are desperate. They've already killed 3 of your sheep. Think about what Sam would want. Martha's grip on the shotgun tightened. Sam would want me to protect what's ours, Jim. Those twin lambs aren't just livestock. They're the last of his prized breeding line. 30 years of careful selection. I can't just sit here and listen to them being slaughtered. The radio on Sheriff Parker's belt crackled. Sheriff, this is Deputy Collins. I'm about 5 minutes out from the Calloway place. Road's barely passable. Before Jim could respond, a loud, frantic bleating pierced the night, followed by vicious snarling. Martha's face went pale. That's them, the black twins. She pushed past Jim and threw open the door, the bitter cold and swirling snow immediately rushing into the kitchen. Martha, wait. Jim called after her, but she was already stumbling into the blizzard, her flashlight beam cutting weakly through the wall of white. But let's go back to how this all started. It was just 3 days earlier when Martha Calloway was enjoying a quiet morning in this same kitchen. Martha hummed softly to herself as she kneaded dough on the flour-dusted countertop. The radio played a Patsy Cline song, Crazy, a reminder of better days when Samuel would swing her around this very kitchen. 3 years since his passing, and some days the absence still felt as fresh as yesterday. Through the window, the December sun cast long shadows across the snow-covered pastures of Eagle Crest Farm. The flock of 30 black-faced sheep, Samuel's pride and joy, grazed contentedly in the lower field. Among them were 2 special lambs, pure black twins born last spring, the result of Samuel's decades-long selective breeding program. The phone's shrill ring interrupted her thoughts. Martha wiped her hands on her apron and picked up the receiver. Calloway residence. Martha, it's Jim Parker, just calling to give you a heads up. Weather Service is predicting a major storm system moving in tomorrow. Could be the worst blizzard we've seen since '79. Martha glanced out the window at the clear blue sky. Appreciate the warning, Jim. I'll make sure everything's battened down. Need any help bringing the sheep in? I could swing by after my shift. I've managed just fine these past 3 years, Jim. I'll get Roy to help me. The boy's been a godsend since Samuel passed. Roy Davis was the 19-year-old grandson of Martha's closest neighbors. Since Samuel's death, he'd taken to checking in on Martha regularly, helping with the heavier farm tasks in exchange for home-cooked meals and the occasional life advice. Well, the offer stands. Don't hesitate to call if you need anything. Alina's been asking when you're coming over for dinner again. Martha smiled at the mention of Jim's wife. Tell her soon as this weather passes, I'll bring one of my apple pies. After hanging up, Martha returned to her bread making, but her mind was now on preparations. The barn would need extra reinforcement. The generator should be checked, and most importantly, the sheep would need to be brought into the sheltered paddock closer to the house. That afternoon, Roy arrived on his battered pickup truck, country music blaring from the speakers. Tall and lanky with a mop of brown hair, he had his grandfather's easy smile and work ethic. Afternoon, Mrs. Calloway. Heard about the storm coming. Grandpa sent me over to help you get ready. Martha stepped off the porch, bundled in her worn work coat. Your timing's perfect, Roy. Let's get the flock moved to the north paddock first. Together, they walked toward the lower field. Roy noticed Martha moving a bit slower than usual. Need bothering you again, Mrs. Calloway? Martha nodded. Weather's changing. I can feel it in my joints better than any meteorologist on TV. As they approached the flock, Martha's eyes immediately sought out the black twins. Samuel had named them Midnight and Shadow. Unlike the other black faces with their white heads and black legs, these two were entirely black, the result of a recessive gene Samuel had been trying to isolate for years. Those two are getting big, Roy commented, following Martha's gaze. Your husband would have been proud. They're special, all right. Samuel always said black wool takes dye better than any other, worth twice as much to the right buyers. He was hoping to eventually establish a whole bloodline of them. Working together, Martha with her shepherd's crook and Roy with his gentle encouragement, they herded the flock toward the northern paddock, which was partially sheltered by the barn. The black twins trotted side by side, never more than a few feet apart. "Is it true what my grandpa said? That Mr. Calloway turned down $50,000 for his breeding stock last year?" Martha nodded. "Thornfield Textiles wanted to buy our entire bloodline. Samuel refused, said some things aren't for sale." Roy whistled low. "That's a lot of money." "It is, but Samuel wasn't doing this for money. It was about creating something lasting, something special." As the sheep filed into the paddock, Martha did a quick count. 29, 30, all accounted for. She latched the gate securely. "Now for the barn." They spent the rest of the afternoon reinforcing the barn doors, checking the backup generator, and bringing extra feed into the storage shed. By the time they finished, the clear blue sky had given way to a steely gray, and the wind had picked up considerably. "Storms coming faster than they predicted," Martha observed, looking at the darkening horizon. "Best you get on home, Roy. Your grandparents will be worried." Roy hesitated. "You sure you don't want me to stay?" "I could bunk in the spare room." Martha shook her head. "I've weathered plenty of storms in my day. You go on home, just check in when you can." After Roy left, Martha made final preparations. She filled the bathtub with water, gathered candles and matches, and made sure her emergency radio had fresh batteries. As night fell, the first snowflakes began to fall, gentle at first, then increasingly persistent. Martha sat by the fireplace, a cup of tea in hand and her old border collie, Rusty, at her feet. Samuel's absence felt particularly acute on nights like these. He would have been sitting in the chair opposite, reading one of his agriculture journals, occasionally looking up to share an interesting fact about soil composition or breeding techniques. "Just you and me tonight, old boy," she murmured to Rusty, who thumped his tail in response. Outside, the wind began to howl. By morning, the world had transformed. Martha awoke to find her farm blanketed in white, the snow still falling heavily. The wind drove the flakes horizontally past her windows, and drifts had already formed against the side of the house. After a simple breakfast, she bundled up and made her way to the barn, fighting against the wind. The sheep huddled together in the sheltered corner of the paddock, their thick wool crusted with snow. Martha counted them twice, all 30 present and accounted for. She spread extra feed and broke the ice forming on their water trough. "This might last a while, little ones," she told them, her words snatched away by the wind. The black twins pressed against each other, their dark forms standing out starkly against the white landscape. Back in the house, Martha tried calling Roy's grandparents, but the phone lines were already down. The electricity followed an hour later, plunging the house into silence as the refrigerator's hum ceased and the lights went out. "Just like old times, eh, Rusty?" Martha lit the kerosene lamps and stoked the fire higher. The day passed slowly. Martha knitted by lamplight, occasionally going to the window to check on the paddock. The visibility was poor, but she could make out the huddled shapes of her flock whenever the wind momentarily abated. That evening, as she prepared for another trip to the barn, she heard it for the first time, a long, mournful howl that cut through the storm's noise. Rusty's ears perked up and a low growl rumbled in his chest. "Wolves," Martha whispered. They weren't uncommon in the mountains, but they rarely ventured this close to the farms unless desperate. The harsh winter and heavy snow must have driven them down from the high country in search of food. Suddenly anxious, Martha grabbed her coat and Samuel's old shotgun from above the fireplace. The trip to the paddock was more difficult in the fading light, the snow now knee-deep in places. When she reached the paddock, relief washed over her. The sheep were still there, though they seemed more agitated, clustered tightly together at the center rather than using the barn's shelter. Martha counted again. 28. She counted once more carefully. 28. 2 were missing, and she had a sinking feeling which ones they were. Circling the paddock, she found the gap, a section of fencing partially collapsed under the weight of a snowdrift, leaving just enough space for a determined sheep to squeeze through. "Midnight shadow," she called, her voice feeble against the wind's roar. Martha followed what she hoped were sheep tracks, though the blowing snow was quickly filling them in. She hadn't gone far when she found the blood bright red splatters across the pristine white snow already being covered by fresh powder. Her heart sank. In the distance, another howl rose, answered by several others. A pack. Martha hurried back to the house as quickly as the deep snow allowed, her mind racing. Missing sheep weren't the black twins. She'd seen their distinctive forms among the flock. But the wolves had taken 2, and they would be back for more unless something was done. Once inside, Martha tried the phone again, still dead. The CB radio Samuel had kept for emergencies crackled with static when she turned it on. "This is Martha Calloway at Eagle Crest Farm. We have wolves. Repeat, wolves have taken 2 of my sheep. Anyone copy?" After several attempts, a voice finally broke through the static. "Martha, this is Sheriff Parker. I can barely hear you. Did you say wolves?" "Yes, Jim. They've already taken 2 sheep. I'm worried about the rest of the flock." "Stay put, Martha. I'll try to get out to you, but the roads are barely passable. In the meantime, keep your doors locked and bring your dog inside." "Jim, I can't just—" The radio crackled and went silent. Martha spent a restless night, waking at every noise, the shotgun close at hand. Rusty remained vigilant by the window, occasionally growling at sounds Martha couldn't hear. "What happened to you?" Roy's face was pale beneath a layer of grime, his eyes sunken with exhaustion. "Truck got stuck yesterday, about 5 miles up the road, tried to walk to the Hendersons but got turned around in the storm." He swallowed hard. "Spent the night in an old hunting cabin. Wolves were all around it, Mrs. Calloway. Never heard so many." Martha helped him toward the house. "Let's get you warm." "Lucky to be alive, young man." Once inside, Roy collapsed into a chair by the fire. His left ankle was swollen and purple, and his clothes were damp with sweat and melted snow. "I need to call your grandparents, let them know you're safe. And Jim." Martha tried the phone again, still dead. The CB radio fared better. "Jim, Roy Davis is here. He's hurt his ankle, but otherwise okay." Jim's relief was evident even through the static. "Thank God, his grandparents have been beside themselves." "Martha, good news. The plow is working its way toward you. Should be there by this evening. Just hang tight." After tending to Roy's ankle, likely sprained, not broken, and making sure he had food and dry clothes, Martha returned to her vigil by the window. The wolves had been absent all day, but as the early winter darkness fell, she spotted them again, 7 now, moving with purpose along the tree line. "They're hungry," Roy said, hobbling to join her at the window. "And they know there's food here." Martha nodded grimly. "They've already taken 3 of my sheep. I won't lose any more." "Mrs. Calloway, you can't go out there, not against a whole pack." "I'm not planning to hunt them down, Roy, but I need to check on the flock one more time before dark, make sure that fence is secure." Despite Roy's protests, Martha bundled up and headed out, shotgun in hand. The bitter cold stole her breath as she made her way carefully across the yard. The sheep were huddled against the barn wall, quieter than they should have been. Martha did a quick count. 25. 2 more gone, and from the trampled snow and spatters of blood it had happened recently. Her heart racing, Martha checked the fence line. The wolves had dug beneath it on the far side, away from the house. As she examined the damage, a howl rose from the woods, closer than before. Martha hurried back to the house, her niece screaming in protest. 2 more gone," she reported to Roy, her voice tight. "They're digging under the fence now." Roy struggled to his feet. "We need to bring the rest into the barn, lock them in." Martha shook her head. "The barn door won't hold them. Those wolves are desperate enough to break it down." "Then what do we do?" Martha was silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the darkening landscape outside. Finally, she said, "We wait for Jim. He'll be here soon." But as night deepened and the temperature dropped further, Martha's worry grew. The CB had gone silent. Perhaps the batteries had finally died, or the storm had damaged the antenna. There was no way to know if Jim was still coming. Around 10 p.m., the wolves made their move. Martha and Roy watched in helpless horror as the pack circled the paddock. The sheep crowded against the barn, bleating in terror. One wolf began digging at the spot they'd started earlier, while 2 others prowled along the fence, testing for weaknesses. "I have to go out there," Martha said, picking up the shotgun. "Mrs. Calloway, please, you can't face those wolves alone." "I'm not losing any more sheep, Roy, especially not those twins. They're all I have left of Samuel's work." Roy tried to stand, wincing as he put weight on his injured ankle. "Then I'm coming with you." "You can barely walk, boy. You'd only slow me down." Martha's tone softened. "Stay here. If Jim arrives, send him after me." Martha put on Samuel's heavy coat and hat, pocketed extra shotgun shells, and grabbed a powerful flashlight. At the door, she turned back to Roy. If I'm not back in an hour, call for help on the CB. Keep trying." And that brings us back to where we started, with Martha stepping out into the cold night against Sheriff Parker's advice, determined to protect her husband's legacy. Martha stumbled through knee-deep snow, the beam of her flashlight bouncing wildly ahead of her. The howling wind masked the sounds of the wolves, but as she approached the paddock, she could make out their dark shapes against the white ground. 3 wolves had managed to dig their way under the fence and were now inside the paddock, separating the black twins from the rest of the frightened flock. The remaining wolves paced outside, waiting. Martha raised the shotgun and fired into the air. The wolves inside the paddock looked up, momentarily startled but not retreating. They were too hungry to be scared away by noise now. "Get away from them!" Martha shouted, approaching the fence. One of the wolves, larger than the others, with a graying muzzle, turned toward her and snarled, baring yellowed teeth. Martha aimed the shotgun at the ground near the wolf and fired again. Snow and dirt exploded upward. This time the wolf jumped back but still didn't flee. Martha reached the fence and began climbing over, an agonizing process with her stiff knee. As she struggled at the top, the large wolf started moving toward her, its posture low and threatening. A shot rang out not from Martha's gun this time. The wolf yelped and darted away. "Martha, stay right there!" Sheriff Jim Parker was running toward her, his service pistol drawn. Behind him, lights cut through the darkness, a snowplow followed by his patrol SUV with chains on its tires. The wolves scattered at this new threat, disappearing into the night. All except for the large one, which circled back toward the black twins, apparently unwilling to abandon such a prize. Jim reached Martha and helped her off the fence. "Are you trying to get yourself killed?" he demanded, his face red with cold and exertion. "They were after Samuel's black twins," Martha explained, her voice catching. "I couldn't just watch." The large wolf was now cornering the twins against the barn wall. Jim raised his pistol. "No," Martha pushed his arm down. "You might hit the sheep." Before Jim could stop her, Martha was climbing through the fence at a lower point where the wolves had damaged it. "Martha." Jim called after her, but she was already limping determinedly toward the confrontation, shotgun raised. The black twins were pressed against each other, facing the wolf with nowhere to run. As Martha approached, the wolf turned its attention to this new threat, hackles raised. Martha stopped 15 feet away, aiming the shotgun at the wolf. Her hands were steady despite the cold. "I've got you now," she said quietly. The wolf snarled, taking a step toward her. Martha's finger tightened on the trigger. Suddenly, a blur of motion came from the side. Rusty, who must have followed Martha from the house, launched himself at the wolf, his old body finding one last burst of loyal courage. The two animals tumbled together in the snow, snarling and snapping. "Rusty, no!" Martha cried, unable to get a clear shot as the animals wrestled. A yelp cut through the night, Rusty's, not the wolf's. The old dog went limp as the wolf's jaws found his throat. Martha felt something break inside her. With a cry of rage and grief, she advanced on the wolf, which was now standing over Rusty's body. It growled at her, blood staining its muzzle. Jim had made his way through the damaged fence and was approaching from another angle, his pistol trained on the wolf. "Martha, get back!" But Martha took another step forward, her shotgun unwavering. The wolf tensed, preparing to spring. Two shots rang out simultaneously, Martha's shotgun and Jim's pistol. The wolf collapsed mid-leap, landing heavily in the snow. Martha rushed to Rusty's side, falling to her knees beside her faithful companion. "Oh, Rusty, you foolish, brave old dog," she whispered, gathering his limp form into her arms. His body was still warm, but Martha knew he was gone. Jim approached cautiously, making sure the wolf was dead before turning his attention to Martha. "I'm so sorry," he said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. Martha didn't respond, her tears falling silently onto Rusty's gray muzzle. Around them, the sheep had begun to calm, realizing the danger had passed. The black twins cautiously approached Martha, their soft bleats almost comforting. "Let's get you inside," Jim said after a moment. "Roy's worried sick, and my deputy is helping him back to the house. We need to take care of that knee. The sheep, we'll secure them properly. The plows cleared your driveway, and I've got 2 deputies with me. We'll make sure nothing else gets to them tonight." Martha allowed Jim to help her to her feet, still cradling Rusty's body. "He saved them," she said quietly. "Samuel's legacy." "Yes, he did, and so did you, you stubborn woman." As they made their slow way back to the house, the clouds finally broke, revealing a sky full of winter stars. The black twins followed them to the fence line, watching as Martha carried their unlikely savior home. Inside, Roy was seated at the kitchen table, his ankle properly wrapped by Deputy Collins. His face lit up when Martha entered, then fell as he saw what she carried. "Oh no, Mrs. Calloway, not Rusty." Martha gently placed Rusty's body on his bed by the fireplace, straightening his legs and smoothing his fur as if he were only sleeping. "He died protecting Samuel's sheep, protecting me." Jim helped Martha to a chair and examined her knee, which had swollen considerably. "You'll need to have this looked at properly when the road's clear. For now, ice and elevation." While Deputy Collins prepared ice packs and made hot drinks, Jim and his other deputy went back out to secure the paddock and check on the remaining sheep. When they returned, Jim's expression was grim. 5 sheep taken in all, including one of the black twins." Martha's head snapped up. "What? No, they were both there. I saw them." Jim shook his head. "One's missing, Martha. We searched everywhere. There's blood by the far corner of the paddock. The wolves must have taken it before we arrived." Martha sat in stunned silence. After everything, after Rusty's sacrifice, half of Samuel's special breeding pair was gone. The legacy he'd worked so hard to build was irreparably damaged. "Which one?" she finally asked, her voice barely audible. "I couldn't tell. They look identical." Martha closed her eyes. "Not to me, not to Samuel." That night, Martha refused to leave Rusty's side, keeping vigil by the fireplace while Jim and his deputies took turns watching the property. Roy, despite his injury, insisted on staying as well, sleeping on the couch. In the morning, the storm had fully passed, leaving a transformed landscape of pristine white under a clear blue sky. Jim's deputies had already left to check on other isolated properties, but Jim himself remained, making breakfast in Martha's kitchen. "Roads should be clear enough by this afternoon," he said, placing a plate of eggs and toast in front of her. "We'll get you to the doctor to look at that knee." Martha nodded absently, her gaze fixed on Rusty's still form. She had covered him with one of Samuel's old blankets, only his head visible. "What will you do now?" Jim asked carefully. "About the sheep." Martha stirred her coffee slowly. "I don't know. Without both twins, Samuel's breeding program can't continue as he planned." Roy, who had been quiet all morning, spoke up from his place at the table. "Mrs. Calloway, I've been thinking, what if the twin isn't dead?" Martha looked up sharply. "Jim said there was blood." "Yes, but what if it escaped? What if it ran into the woods when the wolves attacked?" Jim frowned. "It's possible, but unlikely. The snow was pretty trampled, hard to read tracks clearly." "It's worth checking," Roy insisted. "These sheep are smart, Mr. Calloway always said so, and they know this land." Martha felt a small spark of hope. "Samuel always said the black ones were special, more intelligent, more survivalist." Jim sighed. "Martha, I don't want you getting your hopes up. Even if it did escape, a single sheep wouldn't last long out there with wolves around." "We have to look," Martha said, struggling to her feet. "I have to know." Despite Jim's protests about her knee, Martha insisted on joining the search. They bundled up and headed out, Martha leaning on a walking stick Jim had fashioned from an old broom handle. The remaining twin, Martha identified it as Shadow, was agitated, bleeding constantly and pacing along the fence. When Martha approached, it ran to her, pushing against the fence. "He knows," Martha said. "He knows his brother is out there." They followed the fence line to where Jim had found the blood. The snow was indeed trampled and stained, but as they examined the area more carefully, Roy pointed out something interesting. "Look, these tracks lead away from the fight, too small for a wolf." Martha's heart raced. "That's a sheep track, Midnight's." Jim looked skeptical but nodded. "Let's follow it, see where it goes." The tracks led toward the wooded area that bordered the eastern edge of Martha's property. It was slow going through the deep snow, especially for Martha, but she pressed on determinedly, her walking stick punching deep holes with each step. At the tree line, they paused. The tracks continued into the woods, occasionally mixed with what appeared to be wolf prints. "Wolves followed it," Jim observed grimly, Martha's face set in a determined line. "Then so will we." They entered the woods, where the snow wasn't as deep beneath the canopy of pine trees. The sheep tracks were more defined here, showing a clear path of flight. After about 15 minutes of tracking, Roy called out, "Look, over there!" Through the trees, they could make out a small structure an old hunting blind Samuel had built years ago, and huddled against its wall a dark shape that stood out starkly against the snow. "Midnight!" Martha called, her voice breaking. The shape moved, lifting its head. A soft bleating reached their ears. Martha tried to hurry forward, but stumbled in the snow. Jim caught her arm, supporting her. "Easy now, let's not scare it off." They approached slowly. The black sheep was indeed Midnight, as Martha confirmed. He had a shallow gash along his flank, but was otherwise unharmed, though clearly cold and frightened. "How did he survive the night out here?" Jim wondered aloud. Martha pointed to the hunting blind. "He found shelter. Samuel used to store emergency supplies in there, hay too, for baiting deer." As they got closer, Midnight rose shakily to his feet but didn't run. He seemed almost relieved to see them. "That's Samuel's boy," Martha said softly, reaching out her hand. Midnight came to her, pushing his head against her palm. "Smart enough to hide when he needs to." Getting Midnight back to the farm was a challenge. The sheep was weak from his ordeal and still nervous. Eventually, Jim fashioned a travois from fallen branches and his coat, and they pulled Midnight back through the snow, the sheep too exhausted to resist. When they approached the paddock, Shadow began bleeding frantically, running along the fence. The moment they opened the gate and released Midnight, the twins reunited in what could only be described as an embrace, pressing against each other and making soft sounds. Martha watched them, tears in her eyes. "Samuel would say I'm being foolish, seeing human emotions in livestock. But look at them, they know, they understand." Jim put an arm around her shoulders. "I think Samuel would be proud of you, Martha, proud of how you protected his legacy." Martha nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. In the days that followed, as the roads cleared and life in Eagle Crest Valley began returning to normal, Martha made her peace with Rusty's death. She buried him on a sunny hilltop overlooking the pastures he had helped protect for so many years. Roy, his ankle healing well, became a more regular presence at Eagle Crest Farm. His interest in Samuel's breeding program grew, and he spent hours studying Samuel's meticulous notes and records. One evening, as Martha and Roy sat at the kitchen table reviewing Samuel's breeding journal, Roy asked, "What if we continued Mr. Calloway's work?" Martha looked up, surprised. "We," Roy nodded eagerly. "I've been reading everything Mr. Calloway wrote. I understand what he was trying to do with these black sheep. It's fascinating, Mrs. Calloway, and important." "It would take years," Martha cautioned. "Decades even. Samuel started this when he was younger than you." "I know, but it would be worth it, wouldn't it, to finish what he started?" Martha studied the young man across from her, his earnest expression, his genuine interest. She saw something of Samuel in his dedication. "You really mean it, don't you?" Roy nodded. "My grandparents are getting older. They've been talking about selling their place, moving into town. But this," he gestured to the book spread before them, "this is something I could see myself doing, learning, building on." Martha felt a weight lift from her shoulders, a weight she hadn't fully acknowledged until now, the weight of a legacy she couldn't carry alone. "Samuel would have liked that idea," she said finally. "He always said knowledge should be passed on, not taken to the grave." That spring, when the twins' wool was sheared, it yielded the richest, darkest fiber Martha had ever seen. True to Samuel's prediction, it took dye beautifully, producing colors of unparalleled depth and vibrancy. Martha sent samples to textile mills and artisanal weavers across the country. The response was overwhelming: offers to buy the wool at premium prices, inquiries about breeding stock, invitations to showcase at agricultural fairs. On a warm afternoon in June, Martha sat on her porch watching Roy work with the sheep in the lower pasture. The twins, their wool beginning to grow back, stood out among the flock, a testament to Samuel's vision and Martha's determination. Jim Parker's patrol SUV pulled into the driveway, and he joined Martha on the porch, settling into the chair that had once been Samuel's. "How's the knee?" he asked, nodding toward her leg. "Better. Doctor says I'll always have a limp, but I can live with that." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching Roy with the sheep. "He's good with them," Jim observed. Martha nodded. "Samuel would have approved. The boy has a natural touch." Jim hesitated, then said, "Eleanor and I were wondering if you'd given any more thought to her offer." Eleanor Parker had suggested Martha consider moving into town, into the small apartment above the Parkers' garage. "Just for the winter months," she'd said. "The farm would be here waiting for you in spring." Martha had been resistant to the idea initially. Leave Eagle Crest Farm even temporarily. It seemed unthinkable, but the harsh winter and her injury had forced her to reconsider her stubbornness. "I've been thinking about it," Martha admitted, "and about Roy's interest in learning Samuel's breeding program." "He's serious about that?" Martha nodded. "His grandparents are selling up. He needs somewhere to go, something to put his energy into." Jim understood where she was heading. "You're thinking of taking him on? As what, an apprentice?" "As a partner, eventually. This place is too much for me alone, Jim. I see that now, but I'm not ready to give it up either." Jim smiled. "Samuel would say that's a practical solution." Martha laughed softly. "He would, wouldn't he? Always the practical one, my Samuel." As they talked, the black twins separated from the flock and made their way up the hill toward the porch, moving with the easy confidence of animals who know they're valued. They stopped at the gate, looking expectantly at Martha. "Those two," Jim chuckled. "More like dogs than sheep." Martha rose slowly, reaching for her walking stick. "They know who saved them. Animals remember, Jim. They understand more than we give them credit for." She made her way down the porch steps to the gate, where she scratched both sheep behind their ears, a special spot Samuel had discovered years ago. Midnight and Shadow leaned into her touch, their dark eyes almost wise in their woolly faces. "You two caused quite the commotion this winter," Martha told them softly. "But you were worth it. Samuel was right about you all along." Over the fence, Roy waved from the pasture, and Martha waved back. The sun was warm on her face, and for the first time since losing Samuel, the future of Eagle Crest Farm seemed bright and certain. That night, as Martha prepared for bed, she paused at the photo of Samuel on her nightstand, taken on their 45th anniversary, his face weathered but happy, his arm around her shoulders. "You'd approve, I think," she told the phode. "Of Roy, of my plans for your sheep. You always said we have to look forward, not back." She touched the frame gently. "I saved them, Samuel, your special twins, and now they'll help save this place we built together." Martha climbed into bed and switched off the. Outside, a lone wolf howled in the distant mountains, a sound that no longer filled her with dread. She had faced the wolves and won. Not alone, but with help from Jim, from Roy, from faithful Rusty, and in a way, from Samuel himself, whose wisdom still guided her. In the paddock near the house, the black twins slept side by side, their dark forms barely visible in the moonlight, but present, enduring, a legacy preserved against all odds. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments.